Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Korea Economic Institute of America. My name is Nicholas Hamasevich, and I'm the Director of Research and Academic Affairs here at KEI. Thank you all for coming to today's Academic Paper Series event. Our Academic Paper Series program consists of KEI commissioning up to 10 papers a year from experts and scholars on topics impacting the Korean Peninsula and affecting the US-Korea alliance. The Academic Paper Series reports are then compiled and republished in the On Korea volume. So this paper will be published again in early 2015 in the newest version of the On Korea volume. For example, this is a copy of our 2014 On Korea that contains our Academic Paper Series reports from last year. Today we have a great program for you. Recently, we've had the story that Sony Pictures was investigating to see if it was hacked by North Korea. While it is still uncertain if North Korea was behind it, the story has reminded people that North Korea has cyber warfare capabilities and has conducted cyber attacks in the past. The ability to remain anonymous, or at least have some deniability of wrongdoing, makes North Korea's cyber warfare skills dangerous for everyone, especially the US-Korea alliance. We're excited to have with us Dr. Alexandre Mansourov to talk about his paper analyzing North Korea's cyber capabilities and how the US-South Korea alliance should properly respond to these emerging threats. Dr. Alexandre Mansourov is an adjunct professor at the School of Advanced International Studies at the Johns Hopkins University here in Washington, D.C. He is also a visiting scholar at the US-Korea Institute at SAIS and a founding member of the U.S. National Committee on North Korea. Dr. Mansourov led the North Korea program at one of the U.S. government think tanks from 2008 to 2012 and worked as a full professor of security studies at the U.S. Department of Defense Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies from 2001 to 2007. He has also done work with Brookings and Harvard. He studied at Kim Il-sung University in Pyongyang, graduated from the Moscow State University of International Relations, and received his PhD in political science from Columbia University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alexandre Mansourov.
Thank you, Nicholas. Okay. How do we turn it on? No. Okay, got it. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a profound pleasure for me and a privilege to address this distinguished audience. Let me first express my gratitude to the leadership of the Korean Institute of America, Economic Institute of America, for giving me this opportunity to share my views on this very timely subject with you. When you probably ask yourself, well, what is this guy doing on the podium talking about cyber warfare? Does he qualify or not? There's a book which I found at the library here. It's called Bytes and Bullets, Information Technology Revolution and National Security on the Korean Peninsula. I did it 10 years ago. 2005 when it was published, you know, we wrote it. It's a collective volume. I did a conference, big conference at the Pacific Command at that time. People think we were crazy when we began to talk about the threat of cyber warfare on the peninsula. It was after the first cyber attack from the north in 2004, at least we think it was the first one. So anyway, 10 years ago, this was the subject of my interest. Whereas I began to look at North Korea in 1984, actually, this year. It's almost the 30th anniversary since I've been looking at that tiny dot, you know, on the globe pulsating. And believe it or not, I do begin to see, you know, some of the pulsations when you look at it for so long. Now, today, I will be talking about the North Korean cyber warfare and the challenges which it may be posing for the US-ROK alliance. But let me start by making a somewhat controversial statement that North Korea does have a cyberspace. Believe it or not, but the DPRK does have its, and many people don't even think that there is the cyberspace in North Korea just because it's disconnected, from the World Wide Web. But it does have its own virtual information environment. And its physical infrastructure, it has a domestic intranet of network computers, closed intranets, cellular technologies, fiber optics cables. Basically, whether they call it Kwanmyeon network, the Bright Star, or the North Korean government denies that, they call it Kwanmyeon and call it some other name, whatever. But the cyberspace that they have, this internal cyberspace, it's constantly evolving. Because the technologies they use, they change. The people who use those technologies, they change over time. And that affects the size and the scope of their cyberspace. The technical modalities, the technologies which they use, the bureaucratic regulations are changing inside. And here you can see some of the capability, they have their own iPads, they have their own laptops, iPods, and all that. Whether they're domestically manufactured or, imported from abroad, assembled from imported components, that's a question of controversy. But they do have the technology, the people, and the infrastructure. Now, obviously, by and large, North Korea is disconnected from the World Wide Web. And if you wish, this is the extreme case of the most restrictive cybersecurity policy there is out there in the world. And moreover, since the North Korean gateway to the internet goes through China, Beijing's Great Firewall offers an additional layer of protection, censorship, and surveillance for the North Korean cyberspace. If you wish, North Korea has a very secure model of the internet designed primarily with the security in mind, which for them solved the problem of anonymity and the inability to limit access. Now, how should we assess the North Korean cyber threat? It's not an easy to do because we have to answer three questions at least, whether they can identify our vulnerabilities properly, whether we can measure the effects of the exploitation of our cyber vulnerabilities. Secondly, and finally, whether we can correctly identify the intentions and the willingness to exploit those cyber vulnerabilities that they can or cannot technically identify. And we know very little about all three questions which I just mentioned. Why? Because in general, we know very little about the North Korean cyber capabilities. We know very little about their cyber weapons or intentions. And therefore, we tend to inflate the cyber threat coming from North Korea. So, we have this tendency to play it safe, or we tend to assume the worst case scenario. Whatever happens, blame the North Koreans. They must be behind it. And in the worst case, people in Seoul and Tokyo, they're waiting for the cyber Pearl Harbor, to happen any day. I can tell you that on this side of the ocean, at least from my experience, the US analysts, they tend to be less alarmist when they look at North Korean cyber threat. I agree with Jim Lewis, who once said that North Korea has strong interest in rugged self-made technologies, but it uses a lot of bluster and exaggeration to intimidate its enemies. And we haven't seen really nothing from North Korea that could qualify as a cyber war or an act of cyber terrorism yet. Another US analyst believes that the North Korean cyber arsenal offers the North Koreans a cheaper way, much cheaper way of developing global military reach, in contrast to these enormous political costs and economic costs involved in developing the nuclear weapons and missile technology. So the price tag attached to the cyber capabilities development is much, much cheaper than the one attached to the development of the nuclear weapons. And so I believe that we should not overestimate the North Korean regime's cyber capability, and yet I agree we should not underestimate the potential impact of the North Koreans using less advanced, kind of quick and dirty tactics to cripple their much more advanced high-tech targets. Now, and as always, you know, when we are trying to figure out who is behind it, yet another cyber attack, we'll have to deal with the attribution problem. And really, some people think we know who did it, whatever it may be. You know, some people may think we don't know who did it, or we may be just kidding. But I'm always skeptical. When I read yet another story about the North Korean alleged cyber attack, I'm always skeptical about these claims because I recognize the inherent uncertainties in cyberspace and the limitations of our knowledge of what North Korea may or may not have, and what it does, and why the regime does what it does. It's still a black box. And although some people may believe that, you know, we have a pretty good view inside of that black box and a pretty good understanding of the driving dynamics there, you know, I tend to disagree. And so the ultimate question people ask is whether the North Korean cyber capabilities pose what they call the advanced persistent threat to the United States and its allies. I believe they probably do, but again, it's a very difficult task to prove it. So I wouldn't take it lightly. Now, and of course, we have this latest controversy, the Sony pictures. Let's do a quick poll here. How many of you think that the North Koreans did it? Just raise your hand. Okay, we have six people. And how many of you think that somebody else may have done it? Okay, so split more or less even. Now, of course, the Sony headquarters got hit with this cyber attack, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, with that message on the screens of, you know, hundreds of computers hacked by GOP. And of course, 6 of you think that the North Koreans did it. But when you think about it, in all the previous attacks, the North Koreans never made undisclosed demands threatening that if those demands were not met by the corporate management, then they would you know, do some nasty things like disclose these files and those files. So that's number one, very unusual. You know, for North Koreans, they've never done it. A. B. North Koreans really never bullied the corporate managers of the, you know, their target organizations with Twitter posts. hunting them down and threatening them. And that's what's happening in this particular case, that the Sony CEO is being, bullied in all the Sony Twitter accounts by nasty messages. Maybe it's a new tactic, but they've never done it before. Again, the hashtag, GOP Guardians of Peace. North Koreans, when they, hit, they kind of never leave the names behind, So, again, I have no definitive proof that they have not done it. I'm just saying that we've seen a few, tactics which were used in this particular incident, which are not characteristic of the previous North Korean attacks. And what needs to be done is very comprehensive and thorough digital forensics, to establish who actually did it. Because believe it or not, I mean, Sony, as any other corporation, has a lot of disgruntled employees. And I'm just curious, especially if your information security chief, is replaced, then, again, I'm not saying that's what happened in Sony, but we know in the past that happened in major corporations. When they changed the information security teams, then incidents like this happen. Also, again, we know that some organizations, some hacktivist groups, they had issues with Sony before because of Sony's corporate practices, which they didn't like, and they hacked Sony's before. Of course, just because there is this movie that's about to be released in a couple of weeks, and because the North Koreans, threatened one of the government outlets, propaganda outlets, issued a threat against me. It doesn't really mean that they necessarily would do it, because, again, in the past, a lot of organizations angered the North Korean government, a lot of public organizations in the West, and virtually none of them had been hacked in such a high-profile way like this. Again, if anything, what a huge publicity. I thought just on the eve of my report, for this to happen, it drew additional attention. And Sony, before the release of this movie, to get that kind of publicity, not that they needed it, but, it's free publicity, and I'm sure, people would be flocking into the movie theaters after that. I'm just thinking that if you're a member of an international hacker group and you have an agenda and you want to hide your tracks, the best way to do it is just to basically point the finger at North Korea, whisper, it's North Korea. And the horde of investigators immediately would be stampeding in that direction. And, you'll pretty much achieve your goal of hiding your tracks and misdirecting the investigation. And North Koreans, in the past, they did fall victim to, that particular tactic. So, again, I think we should leave it to the digital forensics to determine whether it's the North Koreans or somebody else who's behind it. I will not take that responsibility on myself, because I just don't have enough information to make that judgment call. Now, surely, when we clearly see much more attention paid to the development of concepts and doctrines, and the doctrine of cyber warfare in North Korea, especially since 2009, when Kim Jong-un was designated as, the heir apparent to the leader. In the North Korean authoritative official media, we see now references to such concepts as cyber warfare, as opposed to cyber war. Actually, they distinguish between a cyber warfare as a method, one of the methods of the conduct of war, as opposed to cyber war as a way to affect the enemy's will and force him to do what one wants. Kim Jong-il, the previous great leader, he used to talk a lot about electronic warfare as the modern warfare, believing that the next, World War would be the electronic, global electronic war. Again, didn't happen. The world moved on, and so his successor now likes to talk about cyber warfare, and he even once said that cyber warfare is that magic bullet. That's the phrase he used, which will empower the Korean People's Army to launch merciless strikes against Seoul. So he is on the record, and in his mind, cyber warfare includes electronic warfare, computer network warfare, psychological warfare, military deception, and information warfare. So it's all kind of encompasses it all. The North Korean military strategists, they refer to cyberspace as the fifth major battlefield following sky, land, sea, and space. How do I know it? You just read the open sources. I mean, they don't even hide it, And that's what's in the open sources, and that's just we're scratching the surface. You can imagine, what's in the not public domain in North Korea. And they do refer to cyber warfare capability as a core military combat power. Clearly, in all the publicly available writings, the cyber offense is presented as having an advantage over the cyber defense. Why? Because it's cheaper, and it's, the attacker can choose the place and time of the attack, whereas the cyber defense obviously is much more expensive, and you have to basically be able to defend your critical infrastructure, your critical assets anywhere, anytime, because you don't know where the next attack is coming. It's interesting that the North Koreans do not believe, the military theoreticians, that the enemy has the right to retaliate for cyber attacks because, and that's what they say, because of the technical complexity of determining the perpetrators of the cyber operations. And that was in response to a number of pronouncements which the United States Department of Defense and the White House made with respect to all those nation states and all those organizations that contemplate cyber attacks against the United States. Now, let's talk a little bit about what worries the North Koreans, their cyber threat perceptions. And they kind of mention in their writing 6 types of cyber threats that they believe face the North Koreans. Cybercrime is one, believe it or not. But as I started, I said they do have a cyberspace, and they have to deal with such questions as personal identity theft, defamation, cyber vandalism. They call it computer hooliganism. And theft for private gain, causing economic losses. Now, but more importantly, the government is worried about hacktivism. Hacktivism, different international groups of hackers that, for whatever reasons, decide to go after those, public faces of the North Korean cyberspace, the internet, those, half a dozen or so, maybe a dozen or so websites, which we're also familiar with, mostly propaganda websites like Uriminjok-Kiri or KCNA. To be honest, these are more like nuisances to the analysts who follow these websites, outside analysts, than the North Koreans, because the North Korean public, doesn't really, follow what's going on there. So whenever, these websites come under attack from the outside and they're shut down, it's people probably who are in this audience, it's people like me, who get to postpone our daily reading of KCNA or Nodon Sinmun until the time when the North Koreans can, fix that problem. But the North Korean public is not really affected by this. They're worried about cyber terrorism, but cyber terrorism they define slightly differently than we do. Obviously, their major concern is regime survival, and anything that threatens the regime survival, they call it terror and terrorism. And so any actions that in the cyberspace that might create threats directly to the regime, they would call them cyber terrorism. And specifically attempts to construct the underground internet that would surreptitiously spread the democratic ideals and the Western bourgeois values and help, the disgruntled elements to get together and challenge the regime. They would, internet in the suitcase, they would really consider it a terroristic threat. And cyber defections, it's another threat. A cyber threat. And these are the people, the North Korean defectors with the extensive computer expertise, and especially one of the most prominent defectors is Professor Kim Hyun-Gwan, who studied at Pyongyang Computer Science Institute. Again, because these people, they know a lot about the way the North Korean cyber, threat is structured, cyber environment is structured, the level of technologies, the plans, intentions, and all that. So they don't like that. They don't, and especially now because they expand the ranks of their cyber experts, of their cyber warriors. Obviously, the risk of defections is growing, and so the need to do more in terms of cyber counterintelligence is increasing. Cyber espionage is always a threat. It's interesting how the North Korean government, I believe it was last year, at the third committee of the United Nations General Assembly that supported the German and Brazil resolution on the issue of privacy, and because they felt that, the U.S. government, with its global surveillance programs, really, was threatening the national interests. And the cyber warfare. Cyber warfare is another threat. Now, what are they doing about it to address these threats to their cybersecurity? First of all, it's a number of issues. They established the cyber command, expanded the cyber warfare units, substantially increased the training of cyber experts and cyber warriors. This is a little bit controversial, the cyber command question, because we know they have a cyber command. We don't know how they call it. We don't really know, its level, whether it's clearly it's not a branch level organization, a service branch. It's not a core level organization. It appears to be a division-level command unit, but again, its subordination is unclear. The South Koreans believe it's subordinated to the General Reconnaissance Bureau. If you pay attention to how the North Koreans describe the evolution of the U.S. Cyber Command and all the attention they paid to its origins from the Air Force structure, you might conclude that their cyber command unit is also placed within the Air Force, Air and Anti-Air Force. But again, some people suggested that it might be even placed within the Military Security Command, because if they expanded its mission to cover the cybersecurity, and if you look at the recent promotion of General Cho Gyun-chol from Colonel General to 4-star General, some people speculated that maybe it's not only because of his political loyalty and everything he did for the regime, but also because his portfolio expanded to cover the cybersecurity issues. Again, it's still unclear. That's why I put a question mark. The subordination of this cyber command unit is unclear. Now, this is, as I mentioned to you, they expanded significantly the number of cyber warriors, beefed up those cyber units, cyber warfare units, which we think they have, including the Surveillance Bureau number 121, which, by the way, the South Koreans believe is the cyber command unit, and I don't really think so. But they also expanded the Enemy Attack Bureau 204, as well as the Intelligence and Information Surveillance units, which all come under the General Reconnaissance Bureau. And they have different functions, different missions in their cyber operations against the West. What is to remember here, these are the pictures, again, the photos taken just this year from the Mangyondae Revolutionary Academy on the top, and at the bottom, this is actually a picture taken from Hichon, Kangye Provincial E-Business Institute. Now, every province in North Korea have what they call e-business institutes. These are, and they just opened yet another one in South Hamgyong province, but this one is from Chagan province, and that one, I believe, is from North Hamgyong province. Cyber farms, whatever they may be doing there, clearly North Korean economy, I don't think, is equipped to absorb all that information which they produce. Now, and of course the numbers grow. 2004, when we put together this book, the official number of cyber warriors was 100. 100. Now, 10 years later, the South Koreans believe it's almost 6,000, but probably it's twice as much, twice as many. And of course, they have the organization in charge, all these different units involved in all these operations. The brain power, what are they doing? What technologies do they develop? When people look at this photo, they can't take it seriously. But seriously, the North Koreans did master the expert hacking techniques, and we saw it time and again. They did develop plans and logic bombs to paralyze the computer networks in South Korea, in Japan, in the United States, even. They do employ social engineering techniques to collect intelligence. And definitely they're interested in exploiting the underground internet for their own benefit in the South, to stoke up the anti-regime sentiment in the South. Now, in this is how they do it. There are general, I mean, they don't have to invent the bicycle here. There are 5 general stages to developing and deploying a cyber weapon. They do some research, you know, then they do some recon, then they develop it, test it, and finally attack against the vulnerability which they think they discovered. Again, if we discover this vulnerability before them, then the tool, the cyber weapon, may not work. But once it's used, that tool, then we'll patch the vulnerability, and it's useless. You know, we can no longer, they can no longer use it in the future, and that's common to everywhere. What's also characteristic of the North Korean cyber operations is that they tend to exploit the outside resources to conduct the cyber warfare operations. Given the backward IT infrastructure, and backward is a relative term. I mean, it's much advanced if you compare it with 2001 or even 2011 internally, but it's backward if you compare it with the rest of the world. And so North Koreans, they critically depend on the outside resources for cyber operations. And the Korean People's Army may be using servers on several continents for misattribution purposes. People think only about China, but the truth is that they used servers in Latin America for misattribution purposes. They even used servers in the United States, you know, when they attacked the military, in the South Korean military or the US-ROK computer networks. Again, they do run these forward cyber bases in China that conduct the denial of service attacks against the South Korean websites. And of course, this Chilbosan Hotel in Shenyang is like everybody knows about it, everybody talks about it. I'm less worried about that hotel than about a whole bunch of other hotels, which you know, we don't really have much information about, which they use. Again, North Koreans may be involved in supply chain technical penetrations through their work in microelectronic circuit development and production. And of course, they have a whole bunch of software development in Dalian in China who work as subcontractors to produce China's logic bombs. And I know that our South Korean friends, they suspect that the computer software and hardware originating in Dalian really is compromised technically. Now, we cannot exclude the possibility that North Korea may be active in the international cyber black market, including the cyber arms black market and cyber zero-day vulnerabilities market, in which transnational groups, criminal groups, they buy and sell specialized cyber technologies. Again, we can't really discuss it here, but this should be a valid assumption. Also, the North Koreans obviously are scouting for the foreign cyber talent to conduct the cyber operations, and you know, for these purposes, I'm sure they have the money in the bank to pay for the services of these individuals. Now, what should we do to cope with this expanding? It's not a new threat. I mean, it's been there at least for a dozen of years, the threat of the North Korean cyber attacks. But it's an expanding threat, in my opinion. And what should we do to cope with that? First of all, we need to step up the cyber deterrence. And although the attribution challenge makes deterrence strategies rather feeble in cyberspace, because, again, there are so many non-state actors in cyberspace who have their own independent agendas, or who may be proxies for the nation states. It's hard to automatically presume the responsibility of the North Korean state, especially when they come out and publicly deny and saying, everybody talks about March last year attacks, March 20th, I think, against 3 South Korean broadcasters and 4 banks and 2 insurance companies. But the General Staff Department, in a rather unprecedented manner, came out publicly, the North Korean General Staff Department, and denied its involvement and gave us a laundry list of the reasons why they didn't do it, which was rather unusual because when you look at, let's say, Waipido incident, or they now publicly came out and said we did it, and here are the heroes who participated in that battle over the Yeonpyeon Island, and we rewarded them, and it went into our history books as something to be proud about. Now, obviously, the allies must strengthen their cooperation in the cyberspace domain to deter these attacks and to promote the resilience of their critical infrastructure. And I'm glad to report to you that, since 2012, the U.S. and South Koreans, they've been active in working together in the Cyber Cooperation Working Group, as well as they're having these annual cyber policy consultations. But the real question for the allies, I think, is whether we should make another step and strengthen cyber deterrence by tweaking a little bit the Mutual Defense Treaty from 1954 in the same way NATO amended its mutual defense obligation. As you know, last September, the NATO member states agreed to that a large-scale cyber attack against a member country could be considered an attack on the entire alliance, and that could potentially trigger a military response. And some people suggest that maybe the US and South Koreans should take a hard look at this new commitment, see how it plays out in practice, and maybe follow the suit, because that will be a powerful message of deterrence sent to North Korea. Now, being weak offers a few advantages, obviously, in the cyberspace over the strong, because North Korea obviously doesn't have any critical infrastructure connected to the World Wide Web. And South Korea is the most wired country in the world, is so vulnerable in that sense. It's civilian computer networks, communications, it's data, it's critical infrastructure, military infrastructure. So the South Korean traditional strengths, they prove to be its cyber vulnerabilities. And so, they really have to invest much more in cyber defense than the North Koreans do. And they're doing it. As you know, the Ministry of National Defense just established the Cyber Warfare Command. Recently, the Joint Chief of Staff established a Cyber Warfare Center. The National Intelligence Service is expanding, despite all the controversies about political interference and manipulations, is expanding its cyber capabilities, and for all the good reasons. And, I would even go a step further and suggest that the South Koreans, in order to prevent what they fear the most, that's the cyber Pearl Harbor, if you wish, they should study very carefully Israel's the cyber Iron Dome concept. Now, but that's on the defense side. obviously, we shouldn't stop there, and we should be thinking about the computer network offensive operations. Computer network operations, the integral part of the alliance, obviously planning, organization, preparation, and execution of cyber warfare. And a good example is the Operation Orchard. It has nothing to do with the US-ROK alliance, but it has something to do with the North Koreans and the nuclear assistance to the Syrians. So if you read my paper, I'm not going into detail for the lack of time, but if you read my paper, you can find the details about this operation. Now, obviously, last February, the South Korean government publicly announced that it's shifting the focus of its cyber offensive missions from purely psychological warfare to offensive cyber operations with the aim to develop a weapon which will allow them, cyber weapon, to damage the North Korean ability to build nuclear weapons by targeting its facilities for enriching uranium and reprocessing plutonium, as well as to give it the ability to disrupt the North Korean military's ability to launch nuclear-tipped ICBM at the time of crisis. I mean, this was a startling statement. Essentially, they said, look, we want something like Stuxnet, this computer virus, and we want to deploy it at Yonbyon so that, the North Korean nuclear program is brought to a halt. And these are the headlines. Obviously, it made the headlines right away. I think it's really it was done for deterrence purposes. Basically, they were saying, "Look, we're so big, we're so strong that we can do things like this to you." I believe that so it was done on the basis of the key consideration was deterrence, but I would question the wisdom, the legal, moral, and practical wisdom of making statements like this, because the North Koreans can make an anticipatory self-defense argument and basically say that because you're working on these kind of technologies, we have the right to strike out all those military units and all those people who are involved in developing these kind of capabilities. And the North may essentially do it in a highly disproportionate and indiscriminate way, like they usually do it. So I think while it's a worthwhile objective to try to compromise the enemy's weapon systems and military-industrial facilities, especially if one can, quote-unquote, persuade them to do the opposite of what the owners intended. Let's say missile, if they shoot a missile, fine, but if we can get control over that missile and it will fly instead of Seoul to some North Korean destination instead, it's even better. We don't have to destroy it. We just have to guide it properly so that it hits, a new target, desirable to us. Again, if such attacks succeed, they can have really debilitating psychological impact on the users of the computer networks under attack, who may start doubting all the information coming from their computers. And it may help us kind of open up this new battle space, of disrupting the enemy's operations. But all these objectives, they must be kept in secret. And I think this public announcement about cyber offensive designs in Seoul, they went too far. They are unlikely to enhance South Korean cybersecurity and probably will undermine the military security and the South Korea's moral legal standing in the international community. Okay. Now, I know I have to kind of wrap it up. So a couple of more slides. We know that North Korea is adept at waging wars in cyberspace, employing private citizens and non-state actors in other countries to do its bidding. Again, it's not easy to attribute the conduct of these individuals to the North Korean state, because it's hard to ascertain whether they're acting on instructions of the United Front Department, for example, or General Reconnaissance Bureau, or they're acting under its direct control. But whenever we can establish that the North Koreans are behind something, like whatever the cyber attack may be, we should not be silent. We should clearly articulate this position, because in this case, silence will mean acquiescence. And finally, in paper I talk a little bit about the confidence building measures in cyberspace. I know it's premature. I know that South Koreans and North Koreans, they're not really interested in any cyber disarmament or cyber detente. They really don't have any capacity to disrupt or regulate international cyber weapons trade. And each country is pretty much left to its own means to deal with the growing cyber threats. But if there is any movement in the future between the North and the South, and the mill-to-mill contacts are resumed, which, again, may not happen, but it may too, I think they should start a cyber dialogue, because it could serve as a useful mechanism to clear some fog in the cyberspace and lower the cyber tensions on the peninsula. And on this note, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention.
Information there. Please join me in thanking Dr. Alexander Mansourov. Thank you all for coming.